Good morning, afternoon, evening, ladies and gentlemen. I hope everybody out there in the listenership and the viewership of allpointstv.com is doing well, and we are doing well here at the studio. I'm George Moss, the host of the program called What's Going On the number one podcast program in the city of Flint, Genesee County. I'm not sure about the state of Michigan, so I better not say that.
I don't either, but I don't try to keep up with competition.
Yeah, we have to make these claims, and some of it we're just trying to is our aspirations. So take it with a grain of salt. But you know what our goals are, and we're very glad to be here this afternoon. I was watching the program last week. We are a program that comes on before Satori's Black History Corner every second and fourth Mondays of the month. And I always run home to watch that program, and I was watching it last week. And I always enjoy it when they come in, and that means I have to relinquish my chair on time. But we're starting the program on time today, and we're glad to have you out there. A lot of things to talk about. I think that we need to start out with what everybody's talking about, the debate that occurred last week on CNN, the second of 9. I think the Lincoln Douglas debates in 1858. I think there were 7 of those, and the first one really was where Lincoln gave his speech on the steps of the State House in Springfield. I don't think that was even a debate. It was just that he was responding. I don't think Douglas was there for the first one, to my Stephen Douglas. But they have 9 debates scheduled for this election cycle, and we've had 2 of them already, one on Fox, and I thought they did a bad job, and then it went over to CNN last week, and they did an even more horrendous job. And I don't know how we are going to get anything that even remotely sounds like it's objective, because the only difference between Fox's coverage and CNN's coverage of the debates was that Fox was targeting Trump, and CNN was targeting Trump, and then the rest of the Republicans. they were all being targeted on CNN. And Jake Tapper, who was the host of the program, I guess he brought in 2 sidekicks and then put them over to the sideline and had them over there sitting in the spectators gallery, and every once in a while allowed them to ask a question. But he was pretty much the one that was running the show, and he was asking, he had these Republicans fighting each other for 3 hours. Now, CNN has seen this cash cow over on Fox. And, you know, Fox had 28 million viewers, and normally they have, how many viewers they have for these debates? Probably about 4 million. If they do 4 million, they're doing pretty good. But because there's some new energy that's been injected into the political process, I mean, Donald Trump is bringing a lot of energy, and now we see Forina, and she's doing well, and Carson is out there, and they got these non-traditional politicians, and so people are now energized around the election because they want some new blood injected into the political arena. They're sick of these politicians.
Did you see the meme that was in this information I was given about Fiorni, whatever her name is? She did a lot of stuff as the operator, when she was a CEO, that was pretty questionable.
Yeah.
And I don't want her. I can't pronounce her name, but I kind of dismiss her anyway. But
yeah, they're gonna be going after her now. Her poll numbers have gone up since that debate, and she's now polling at 15%. Donald Trump is holding. He had dropped 8 points down to 24%. And now they have Marco Rubio, who did pretty good in the debate. They have him elevated up to 3rd place. Carson has been dropped down to 4th place. And it's all because of the way they're targeting people who rise to the top. And now that Forina is up there, and now she is 15% in 2nd place, she can expect some of the attacks have been going against some of the other candidates. But when you rise up, they don't like any of the Republican candidates, so when you rise up in the fold, you can expect to have missiles aimed at you, because they want to have a Democratic president in, and they are chomping at the bits over there in the Democratic Party because Hillary Clinton has been wounded, and they want somebody that can come in there because they're not going to be able to have Bernard. They call him Bernie. Bernie. That's what they call Barney Fife on the Andy Griffith Show. So we got Bernie Sanders, and the Democratic Party just absolutely cannot come out of the woodwork and admit that they're a socialist party. And that's putting it nicely, because there's another word that starts with the C word that actually describe who they are over there in that party. But they certainly cannot run and come out of the woodwork and then come out in the open, visible, and then run Bernie Sanders. So they got a problem on their hand, because Hillary Clinton is like a wounded duck. She's going down. And there's this festering sore, which is her email and the things that she hid from public sight by destroying some of the emails. Half of those emails on that site were in fact erased. And Ms. Clinton, we don't mean they took a cloth and did it. It means that the way you erase it on the network is that you just go up there and delete it. You don't do a cloth. And we need to get serious about this. And I think that the FBI looking into it. This is not going away, and I think they're going to be, if they're going to do their job, there's going to be some criminal charges that are level. But anyway, in the debates that are going on right now, and I think the first Democratic debate will go on the 13th or the 16th, one of those 2 days, and we'll be watching. It'll be on CNN. We'll be watching to see if CNN handles that debate the way they handled the Republican debate last week, because they were all over those Republicans. Ms. Fiona, why don't you turn toward Mr. Trump and tell him what you think about what he said about your looks. And now, and by the way, let me say this, something that everybody has missed. Carly Forina, Forina, actually got involved in a talking point that comes out of the Democratic Party's playbook. And everybody's so mesmerized by the fact that she did so well, they say, in the debate. That's what the press is saying, the political pundits on television are saying, but the polls that asked you out there in the public, we the people that had to respond to it, and they asked them in these polls. That's not what the polls said, according to what the people were talking about out here in the boondocks, but who's listening to us anymore? The pundits were telling us that Forina won the debate hands down. And so Donald Trump wasn't doing anything up there. He was up there filling space, and of course having these darts thrown at him, and they're landing in his body one after the other, as all of them were ganging up on Donald Trump as we expected. But I'll be watching the debates on the next month when they do the Democratic debates. We're going to see how they handle that, because we're looking at nothing but media bias here, and they are coming out of the woodwork because they want to stop what they perceive as an anti-establishment sentiment that's taken over. And you see it in the fact that the first three candidates up until last week, the first three candidates were Donald Trump, Ben Carson, and Forina. And they're doing, their numbers, if you add up their numbers in terms of the poll, they're polling more than 50%. So I think they better go back there and rethink their program in the Republican Party, those members of the establishment, because the idea was, as they begin to drop out one after the other, then those polling numbers go to the other candidates, and they will eventually overcome the numbers of those in a field of 16 as it is right now, with Rick Perry having dropped out 2 weeks ago. They think that as people drop out, those numbers will then go to these traditional politicians, the establishment politicians, and then the numbers will grow, and they'll eventually supersede the numbers of those over there who are the outsiders. Not necessarily so. The outsiders, 3 of them, have more than 50% of the vote. And if you have all the others, which would be the 13 insiders, because I consider anyone who's been elected to political office to be an insider. And if you're an insider, all your votes, according to the polls, combined would not overwhelm the numbers of those who are the outsiders' votes. And there's only 3 of them and 13 of the others, and you had all 13 up, and you still don't get to 50%. So this idea that this machismo that we're going, I don't know if I can use that word because I think you're not supposed to be using Spanish. but you look at the numbers, and the numbers don't add up. They will still have a problem if 13 of those candidates dropped out, and let's say the 3 were not the ones that were all standing. Let's say Donald Trump was still standing. What happens to Forina's vote? Do they go to the establishment candidates, and she's running an anti-establishment, anti-incumbency campaign, and do her votes go to those who she's running against more vehemently than she is running against Donald Trump? I mean, they have some problems with the comment that Trump made, but they are running as outsiders. So where do those votes go? I don't think they go over there to the 13 candidates that are running as inside political figures. So I think that calculation has to go back. You have to go back to the drawing board and recalculate and recalibrate what that may well pretend down the road. I don't think it's necessarily going to be there when they drop out, that those numbers of these outsiders will in fact go down. But certainly that's what the game plan is. And on CNN, as I said earlier, the only thing that really different from CNN hosting the debate and the way it was hosted by Fox is that Fox went after Donald Trump. I mean, all 3 of the persons that were on that network. And Megyn Kelly hasn't stopped yet. She was on that program she did last Friday was another, it was almost like an hour of just nothing but missiles being thrown at Donald Trump. It was just one attack after the other. And it was an atrocious program. So we know what is happening there, and some of them are not quite as out front as Megyn Kelly is. I mean, Bill O'Reilly is more subtle in it, but you can tell there are some. The only ones over there that's actually carrying his banner is Sean Hannity, because Sean Hannity perceives that he has taken some conservative positions, whether he's been a conservative or not in the past. I mean, he's not been a conservative in the past, but he's more conservative than those other persons that are running right now, and they're talking about he's not conservative. He's more conservative right now, today, than they are. And if they're conservative, then why are they calling them rhinos? Okay. Not that the Republicans are conservative, but the fact they call them rhinos, meaning that they're not even Republicans.
Plus, I'd like to know this. He's the one presidential candidate is actually at least lisping, even if he's not really meaning it. He's regurgitating or saying what the American people have on their minds. Mm-hmm. The everybody else is they're passing stuff down their throats against our objections, saying we know what's best for you. Well, they're not supposed to be there to be our parent. They're supposed to be representatives. They're supposed to cast a vote based upon the constituents' wishes. They choose not to. Don Regal, 78% of the time when he was senator here, he voted against our wishes, and the idiots kept on re-electing him. So, I mean, at least Trump is at least saying, hey, I'm listening to you, and at least I'm regurgitating what I'm hearing you say.
Yes.
Now, I don't really think he's going to do what he says he's going to do, or I don't know. I mean, but
I think the voters are willing to give him a chance. We don't know what he'll do once he gets in office. We know what's been par for the course in the past with these other politicians. They get in there, and they have amnesia once they arrive. They come back, and they can remember what they promised and promise it again in the next election, and then go back there and get amnesia again. But in the Donald Trump case, we don't know, because he's not a traditional politician. And I think that the polls are indicating that they're willing to give these outsiders a chance to go in there and let's see what they'll do. We thought they really are replaying what we're seeing right now in 2015, going toward the 2016 elections, that we're seeing a replay of what occurred in 2008, because the same sentiment that we're seeing with Donald Trump was the sentiment that we saw in terms of the candidacy of Barack Obama. They thought he was an outsider. And he ran as an outsider. He's going to go in there and make the government transparent. Going to put things on C-SPAN. We all believe in that. He's going to go in there and make sure that we knew 3 days ahead of time before they voted on the bill, before he would sign anything, that we had something to say about it. We had input. And then only then would become law. And he got in there, and I think that Obama will go down in history as the least transparent president that we've had. None of them are transparent, but his transparency is non-existent.
Well, I don't know if this is off the subject, but have you seen this meme that's going on Facebook about the IQ of Donald Trump? If you actually look at his SAT scores to get into Wharton, okay, where he went to school at, you'd have to have an IQ range about 150. Well, the way it is what they estimate his IQ range of 156.
I believe that.
That's quite high. Now, if that's the case, like I'm saying, it's a meme. I haven't checked all the facts, but I'm just saying, putting it out there.
Yeah.
If that's the case, I would like to see what the SAT scores of Obama was or all these other ones. And if they want to see, that's the first thing the left always says is, if you don't agree with them, you're an idiot.
Yeah.
You're an idiot.
Yeah.
Well, that's if you're 156 IQ, if that is the case, I would say he could challenge them on. They could at least they can have a tense game of Trivia Pursuit. Okay.
Yeah.
Because basically, I don't know what really IQ measures. I mean, I am very skeptical. But if you're looking at this, they can't make that accusation. Another thing is, too, they can't say he's a zealot for anything, because basically he's admitted he'll go any way he can so he can make money. He's a pragmatist.
Yeah.
Okay? So they should like that because he doesn't have a real strong moral center. That appeals to the left. They don't really have moral centers either. So, I mean, and then with some respect, they should find more kinship with Trump than they do the right-wingers. Because right-wingers, do you notice the right-wingers have a standard, and they hold themselves to it to some degree, but the left can get away with all kinds of horrific stuff, and they'll excuse, let's face it, you just have to look at the case of Bill Clinton's 2 terms. But if you have minor infractions on the Republicans, the Democrats and the progressives are so quick and eager to hang them around, to hang them with that. They have no compassion whatsoever on that. So, I mean, they're hypocrites from beginning to end. But, I mean, but Donald Trump is, let's face it, you don't make money like he did, even though he started out rich. He's been a lot richer. I mean, he started as a poor millionaire, ended up a billionaire. But, I mean, let's face it, the man knows how to make a buck. And he's got an IQ.
Well, he points to his head all the time. He'll say that whatever it was that allowed him to accumulate his wealth, which some are saying totals upwards of $9 billion. He says, whatever that is that I have in here, I want to put that to work for the country. And we have to make this country rich again. This country cannot be made great again unless it's made rich again. It cannot be great. It's carrying an $18.4 trillion deficit right now, and that deficit is going up. They're saying by the time Obama leaves office, it's probably going to be upwards of $20 trillion. That probably is a low estimate.
Well, Sanders, if you adopt what he wants to do, it's going to bring it up to $18 trillion right there.
Just in what he's proposing.
Yeah, and he said, I just read this, he said he's not going to cut taxes. Matter of fact, taxes are going to go up. He's not going to cut any spending. He's going to, we can't keep on doing this, folks. We can't find new ways of taxing people. You can, but you're going to have a deficit. It's not going to have the desired effect. You're not going to get the
Sanders is dangerous, more dangerous than the other. They're all dangerous because they don't believe in the rule of law. But Sanders is talking about giving. It's like it sounds to me like this guy is Herbert Hoover, a chicken in every pot. And people did not only not have a chicken during the Hoover administration, they didn't even have a pot. And so the chicken couldn't have been put in the pot in the first place. There was no pot to cook it in. But everything is going to be free. So since government doesn't produce anything, where does all this free stuff come from? And he's proposing, they looked at his proposal, and his proposals will be $18 trillion right now. Our gross national product, our GDP, only totals, my estimate will be a little bit different than what I see in some of the business books you read. They put it at 16 to 17 trillion. Our GDP is not 16, 17 trillion. Our GDP is 15 trillion plus. So anytime you're overwhelming the GDP with programs that are in excess of your productivity, that's bankruptcy eventually. It just hasn't happened now because of the artificiality of our economy. But those chickens are going to come home to roost. And it won't, and sooner that more so than later. But everything is to be free. Free education, free health care, I guess free babysitting service.
You know what? All the stuff they're advocating has already been free for a large portion of the population, the Flint area at least, for years. I mean, people go to Hurley Hospital, was considered a city hospital. Okay? Even just a few years ago, just a couple years ago, even with all the money they lay out for the indigenous people, it comes from government sources or whoever to pay the bills for it to cover that. Mm-hmm. They still walked away with $1 million that year. is a profit, clear and free. So, I mean, and we have a huge population going to Hurley that are that criteria. They don't have the ability to pay, and they're still getting their bills paid. So, I mean, I don't understand. They act like the Pope's in recent comments. They act like there is no social programs that ever existed, and we're starting from scratch because it's so dire. That's not the case. There's already things in place.
You give your money to an intermediary. What happens, you give your money to the government, which is the intermediary. What happens is that they siphon off a large portion of it for themselves in terms of the bureaucracy that it has to serve. And then they give out a little of the money for the poor, which is always what they want to point to. The poor got to be helped. We need to get more money in the tax base in order to help the poor. And the poor are helped least by the government going through the intermediary of the government, because the government siphons off so much of it for the bureaucracy, which is what government's about. It doesn't produce anything. It has to take the money from the private sector. And it's been shown that the money is much better used in terms of charitable practices. When you put the money into charitable organizations, then let them, they don't have that bureaucracy, they do a much better job of getting the money to those persons that you're trying to help, those parts of the society that are poor. But they act like only government can do it. And anytime I hear a politician like Bernie Sanders, Bernard Sanders, who made himself Bernie because Bernie sounds better than Bernard, just like Robert Woodward sounds better than Bob. I mean, Bob sounds better than Robert. When I use the word Robert Woodward, nobody knows what I'm talking about. But Bob Woodward, the person that helped overthrow the Nixon administration, which is what I wrote about in my post. But when they start familiarizing these names, like Bernie and like Bill, FDR, look out. Has anybody ever heard of, let me give you a name and see if you know who this person is. RWR. Does anybody know? We know FDR, right? We know that's Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Or TR, we know that's what? Theodore Roosevelt. Okay. Do we know what RWR is? Who that person is being identified? No. You know why? Because he's not a socialist. You look at all these names, Bernie, all these names they have out there. I bet you there's not one person known by his initials as a conservative. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's LBJ, JFK, RFK, MLK.
Very familiar, right? Like he's like your neighbors next door, your uncles and your aunties. But Ronald Wilson Reagan, I can tell you right now, there are no initials going to use his name. But look at these names where these initials are used, and what they're telling us is that these are our cut buddies. They have your best interest at heart. And how do we know that? They all want to take from the private sector, put it in the government's hand, and distributing their names out to the people where they can be looked at as being benevolent. That's the name of that cash cow. Now the cash coming out of their own pockets. And we've seen that over years, right? That they pass these policies, and those policies do not apply to them. They take money up in the taxation base, and they don't pay the taxes, and then they distribute it out as if they're the ones that are the benevolent ones. And the taxpayers, who are forced to be benevolent, more so against their will than anything, because the government is a gun, then they don't get any credit for it, and then they talk about the ones paying the taxes not paying their fair share. I mean, the ones paying all the taxes are the top 1%, the top 5%, and the top 10%. They're paying, the top 10% paying 70% of the taxes. If you want to talk about the fair share, the ones that are not paying anything are the ones not paying their fair share. The rich are paying, thank you, John. I should have done this before I came on the air again. The ones that are up there at the top echelons, they say they're not paying their fair share of taxes. You know why? Because they want to confiscate all their wealth. Because they envy the way that wealth was in fact accumulated. They're not on the public dime. These persons are producing a product that people value more than they value those dollars in their pocket, and they're willing to give them the dollars that are basically nothing other than counterfeit currency, inflated by the Federal Reserve, and they're willing to give that currency to the producers for the products that they produce. And that's how they become wealthy, by producing a product. Well, that makes people that don't produce anything, envious. And Ayn Rand is exactly right when she said that those that are the producing class have to get permission from those who produce nothing. And all they do is tax the producers. Well, take their wealth and then put it out in their name as if they're distributing the wealth.
Well, see, the thing is, I've heard talk to the people on the left, the environmentalists and stuff. They'll always say, well, see, you don't understand. See, those resources are like in the ground and they're there for everybody. And these people are using before they get a chance. This other group gets a chance to understand how to use them. So basically, you're saying if you didn't have this producer, nobody would be enjoying any benefit, even if it's like not as more marginal amount of enjoyment or abuse, than if somebody who wasn't a producer found a way of utilizing that stuff. So I mean, just like they were saying, like basically, like they always talk about the oil on the ground, right? The crude oil. Oh, like P.J. O'Rourke makes it's like it's been there for years, but guess what? It does us better if we're using it. So the producers are finding ways of using raw materials. Why are they vilified? And even if they wanted to, the producer couldn't find a way of capitalizing to the max where nobody else would enjoy any benefit or drive any profit or benefit from it. Everybody else does. The way the system is, they already derive. I mean, let's face it. You don't have to be a producer of oil to get even if you're driving the city bus. Your diesel fuel is being run by petroleum product that somebody learned how to refine. So even if you're a total person totally living on the streets, but you're now on a city bus going somewhere, you're enjoying the benefit of somebody who had ways of seeing to using that stuff. I mean, yeah.
I laugh there because Obama was saying that those that are the producers, they didn't produce that. What does Obama produce? And what do any of those politicians in Washington produce? If they were a producing class, they wouldn't have to be living off of the public dime and complaining as Al-C. Hasten just did a couple of weeks ago, complaining about they're only making $174,000. Yeah, you're making $174,000 because you're not producing anything.
Well, it's like, isn't that a lot for just? Let's face it. They admit that all these huge bills, like the health care bill, 2,000 pages. They admit it. They don't even know what's in it. And they're the ones that are supposed to be writing it. So the little responsibility they are supposed to have, they're not meeting that. So they're getting overpaid if they're not writing the legislation they're passing.
If they're being paid based upon their productive capacity, that is their capacity to produce anything, then every member of Congress is overpaid. I think we ought to be paying them the salary we're paying to our military, our generals, and, well, not even that salary. Pay what they're paying to the lowest rank in the military. These persons are risking their lives, and they're living in barracks, and they are the defenders of the country. Without them, the flanks are open to those who are trying to harm the nation, which the politicians are not even doing, because they're letting these people that will harm the nation inside the nation so they can harm the nation. I mean, look what they're doing with Syria, these Syrian refugees. I'm just saying they're not the job that, if we pay them by the job they're doing, in fact, if we have them getting their salary based upon how much of what they're doing benefits the country, I don't think anybody would be paid up there in Washington. Does anybody think that we're being served as a nation by having those guys up there just like they're in a candy store handing out candy to the population, and we got an $18.4 trillion debt?
Here's how we could get notice from our own leaders, the people we elect. We go out of the country for a while, not let them know about it. Then we come back in with no papers, looking ragtag, and just show up on boats, and they'll let us back in, and then they'll listen to us more. They care more about people who aren't even from here than they are the people here. And they almost want to hold you in contempt for be concerned about your place in the world that they're helping create within your country. Yeah. They're making you feel like you should feel xenophobic or racist. Yeah, you have concerns for that.
Yeah, we should be thankful to the political class, the political elite, for driving the country down. And the way they hide their lack of leadership and their incapability of running a country, because again, they're not doing a good job of running this country by any stretch of the imagination. But the way they hide that, They hide it because by borrowing from the future, and we haven't gotten to the future yet, so we can't see they're harming the nation. Not only now they're harming the nation, they're harming it in the future too. They're borrowing from the future. What is the national debt? The national debt is that we are borrowing from the prosperity of the future. And so they are borrowing from the time that is yet to get here. It hasn't arrived yet, and what they're doing is that they're bringing the money from the future and bringing it into the present and distributing that as the prosperity. That's what the national debt is. And they're saying we owe the money to China and Japan, maybe 2.8 trillion of that. Now, that's what they try to make people believe. They want people to believe they're borrowing it from outside the country. The $18 trillion plus is being borrowed from places like China and Japan. I mean, that may that makes you feel good. That's not where the borrowing is coming from. The borrowing is coming from them borrowing from the children who are not even here yet. That's what the debt is. They're borrowing from the future. And the people are not here to object to it, and that's how they get away with it. Because these politicians basically are what? If you are upset about people that are robbing, how they say, stealing candy from a baby, I don't think anybody would feel good about someone reaching into a baby crib. The baby got maybe a candy sticking in his mouth, and somebody go in that baby crib and grab out of it the candy and then run off. I think we'd all be looking for that guy, right? We want to put that guy in jail. He got to go to jail. You robbing from a baby, stealing candy from a baby. I mean, that's a crime. Okay. Well, we have theft on a higher level. It is not just one baby in a crib, but it is not just the babies, that's all the babies in a crib. It's all of the babies in the crib and the babies not in the crib because they're not born yet, all of them too. They're included in it, and they're stealing their stuff. That's what the national debt is about. If people knew what the national debt was like in terms of what it actually pretends, people would really be upset about that because they don't think in terms of their children and their grandchildren. I mean, if you told people that you were robbing from their grandchildren, I think people would be up in arms. So they make it like the borrowing is offshores.
Actually, I've done that before. I brought that up when I was sitting around with some people talking about how they want to get this more and more and stuff. And I said, you're stealing from your grandkids. And I've actually had them say, well, they're not here yet, so it doesn't matter. And I'm just saying, like, this is what the country's become. It's become, you can't even use the appeal for, what we're supposed to be concerned about the future generations. You can't even, that's the thing is, you cannot even appeal to that. Yeah, there's no sense of honor.
Yeah, John, that's the way we think right now. It's like, for example, they're threatening to shut the government down. That was part of the debate last week too, where they were saying, I think that's one of the issues. I will give her credit for this. Farina hit it out the park in terms of her statement about Planned Parenthood. She said that if we do not stand up on this issue of funding Planned Parenthood, when we saw them taking children and tearing their bodies apart and then selling their body parts for profit, if we can't stand up on that, we're not talking about anything other than the lack of character of the nation at this point. So she was saying that we have to stand up on this issue. Well, the rest of those persons over there, quivering as they do because they don't want to actually challenge this president. We sent them up there to challenge Obama in 2010. We took the House from the Democrats and wanted to go in there, and we couldn't do it all at one time. We gained some senatorial votes. We took over, the Republicans took over the House in 2010. And they wanted them to go in there and use the purse strings, which is what the House has. All monetary matters of the nation must go through the House first because that's the body that goes before the people on a more annual basis. Every 2 years they go before the voters. If the vote do something that the voters don't like, they can have an instant response from the voters that it will hold them in check. Well, we sent them up there and they had the purse strings, and guess what they did? They opened purse strings up to the president. And nothing that they did to stop any of his programs, which was what they said were sent there to do, And the president just goes on and does everything he wants to do. And now he got a threat out that if they do not put Planned Parenthood's $500 million in the budget, that the president's going to veto it. So now they're scared, because if the president vetoes the budget, which we can all see that he's the one stopping the budget from going through, all of a sudden the Republicans get the blame for it. Why? Because they put a $500 million largesse in, took it out of the bill, that did not give federal funding for Planned Parenthood. Not that Planned Parenthood closed its doors the next day. It's just that they don't get federal money, and we don't commit to having the federal government making us an accomplice in what is taking place at Planned Parenthood, which is genocide that's going on there. I mean, Black Lives Matter, I don't know how you sleep at night. You out here demonstrating at these fairs and going where nobody's killing any black folks. You're not even going over there to Chicago. But every 3 days at Planned Parenthood, they have the equivalent of what the Klan did, took 86 years to do by the Klan. The Klan lynched 3,000 plus blacks. And it took 86 years to do that. Planned Parenthood does that every three days to black children. And you can use these words like fetus and things like that, which was actually going on there. But what you have there is the oak tree where the lynching used to take place. And now that they moved it from the oak tree to the buildings, you don't have any complaints about it. You can just shut up about Black Lives Matter. And we can shut that down. That's just noise that's being made there. But they're saying if the $500 million is taken out by those who hold the purse strings, and the Constitution gives them every right to determine the budget, because the budget doesn't start with the executive branch. It starts with the House, and it doesn't even start in the legislative branch. It starts in a particular part of the legislative branch. In Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution, it gives the prerogative to the House. All bills that have to do with finance start off in the House of Representatives, and therefore, since the Obamacare, which he tried to pass off as commerce, started off in the Senate, at least the last parts of it, because they were trying to ram it through before they lost their 60% vote in the Senate. They started that last phase of it in the Senate. That's unconstitutional, because the court, Roberts, you did this. John Roberts went over there with Kennedy, and the three we could always count them to be on the left: Kagan, Ginsburg, and Sotomayor. We knew that where they're going to be, and then of course you got Stephen Breyer over there, and he's a braying. Don't get me started on a word for him, but Breyer is a braying, and there's a word that goes after that. But we knew John Roberts went over there with the swing voter, the three liberals on the court, and then he went over there and joined with Kennedy, and you know, Kennedy is going to be over there because he's a swing vote. Shouldn't be a swing vote in the court unless the language they be a pendulum swinging back and forth. The language is pretty concrete, but they're going to act like you can have a swing vote in the court. And how do you have a swing vote in the court if the language is unchanged? But that he's known as a swing voter. So these people are on the court, and they're talking about they're up there legislating from the bench. They're not legislating from the bench. They're dictating from the bench. These people are dictating it to us. But they're saying that, well, I was saying that John Roberts, when John Roberts went over there and said, no, we cannot give you Obamacare under the Commerce Clause, not under Article 1, Section 8, Clause 4, we can't give you that. Because commerce, you can't say that a person is involved in commerce if they're not involved in being out there buying something. You can't make them buy anything. So not being involved in the market cannot be called commerce. If people are not buying insurance, you can't make them buy insurance. Say that's commerce, that they're not participating in the commercial arena. In other words, they were arguing before the court, and Roberts couldn't accept this argument, or really he'd be out there. But what the government was arguing was that when you do not engage in commerce, it has an effect upon commerce. So non-engagement in commerce is also commerce. And they tried to run that by the court, and Roberts said, no, we can't go with that. But what Roberts did was say, but we can, however, go with it under the right to, the Congress has the right to, in fact, raise revenue, the right to taxation. And so, given the 16th Amendment having the right to direct taxes, which was forbidden in the Constitution as it was originally written, but the 16th Amendment changed that, and now you have direct taxes. Roberts comes in and say that you can then put the Obamacare under taxation and therefore make it constitutional under that. That wasn't even the argument when they went to court. Roberts changed the argument and then made it constitutional by him giving the argument that would fit underneath the Constitution as far as he was able to see. It really is unconstitutional. But that doesn't matter because the rule of law doesn't prevail anymore in this country. Well, now they're saying, don't forget the House has a responsibility to the purse. If the president has a bill on his desk and it doesn't have in it the $500 million for Planned Parenthood, then they're going to vote, the president's going to veto it, and the Republican Party is going to get the blame if the government shuts down. Well, two things. Number one, how does that fit into the same sentence that they pass a budget through the Democratic-controlled House and the Democratic-controlled Senate, which is also a majority, pass it, and then it goes to the president, who is not a Republican. He's a Democrat, right? He didn't change parties last night. The last thing I heard, they were criticized. Republicans were still taking a shot at him, and he didn't change parties. If he had, they wouldn't be taking a shot because the way the political process works, if it's your guy, you don't criticize him. So they criticize him, so we can assume that he's what? Still a Democrat. I don't think that's chemistry. So it passes in the Republican-controlled House. Then it goes over to the Senate. And by George, it passes in the Republican-controlled Senate. And it goes to the Democrat president's desk and is vetoed because it's unacceptable because it doesn't have the $500 million in there for Planned Parenthood. And the Republicans get blamed for shutting the government down. That's what they're saying is why they cannot oppose this president. Now, somebody help me understand this. Because you know what's happening here. They're doing everything they can to go along with this. You know why? Because they only disagree with it on the surface. And that's how it operates up there. Say what you will about Donald Trump, but one thing that Donald Trump is a threat to is that House that's in order in Washington where both sides are playing against the middle and they're on the same team from different vantage points coming toward the same ends. They have not opposed Obama on anything, including this unconstitutional, and it's certainly unconstitutional, way in which they are now trying to push through Congress and have pushed it through the Iranian treaty. And that's a treaty, by the way. The president cannot negotiate with a foreign government, absolutely cannot do it, and do so as an executive agreement, and then have all the country under what what is this, a dictatorship? If the president can, this is ludicrous that they're passing this notion that this is an executive agreement. But let me tell you why they're doing that. Go read Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2, which says that the president has the right, don't forget Article 2 sets up the executive branch of government. So in Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2, it says the president has the right to make treaties, provided that 2/3, well, first of all, in conversation, doesn't use the word conversation, use another word, but it has to do with input from the Senate. But after they have consented to it, to make sure that the final result is what they would agree to, being the representatives at the time that they drew up the Constitution in 1787 as representatives of the state, the idea was, once the president does it, since he's not King George III, nor is he George Washington, they didn't want to give George Washington that authority. I mean, look at how the Treaty of Paris was agreed to in 1783. George Washington couldn't make that agreement. The Congress had to have the voice in it, and they were the representatives of the states. When they changed it to the Constitution, they made sure that dynamic remained. You know, the federal government didn't have a lot of power under the Articles of Confederation. That was one of the problems in it. They had weakened it so much because of their memory of what had happened under King George III, that when they set up the government on the Articles of Confederation, the 13 articles that was found in that document, the federal government couldn't do anything. So they changed that, but when they changed it and gave it more power, they wanted to limit it in some other ways. And one way they did it was in terms of the treaties. And in the treaty ratification, the president can certainly go out there and sign an agreement. But he cannot submit it to the Congress as an agreement. He has to submit it to the Congress as a treaty. You see, it's an agreement. It's an executive agreement when the president talks to the nation. It stops being an agreement when he takes it to the Congress. Can you fatheads understand up there in Washington? This is laughable what they're doing, because they're putting the wool over the American people's eyes. And we don't read the Constitution. I mean, a lot of it's not a real complex document, but it's got to be read in order to be able to be understood. You can't understand if you don't read it. But you have to have 2/3 of the senators. It says 2/3, provided that 2/3 of the senators present concur. Now, maybe not all the senators will be there, but if they're all there, and I think you hold them responsible if they were not there, because you want your representatives at the tables to say yes or no based upon your will. And the popular will is very clear. 71% of the American people do not like this deal, think it should be put down and defeated, and that's where they run into the cracks. The way they got around the verdict of the people, because the representatives, the people not being represented by the representatives, but to hide that and to shield that, what they did was go through a backdoor approach. And that is 34 senators can side with the president. So if he vetoes their objection, and they're going to object to it because that's where the voters are looking at what they're going to do, so they object to it. But then, behind the people's back, the president vetoes it, and then it goes back to the House and the Senate. Don't forget, the House has no role in this, has a role in the purse, but has no role in the treaty agreement. Nowhere is that in the Constitution. So when it goes back to the House and Senate, 34 senators can side with the president. Now let's see. There'll be 501 members of Congress that can get away without being accountable, and 34 members can take it on the chin because of what? They've gone out there and decided which of the members of the Senate can take a hit because their constituents are not so much holding these chumps to the bit about not signing this agreement. So 34 can get away with it because they don't have these constituents. They're so adamant about it. See, there's 29% of the people who are in agreement. Well, maybe those constituents over here in this senator's state, or maybe they're over here in this state. They might be in these red states. So they decided that they can go with the president. But most of those persons are in that 71% bracket, and they can't come out of the woodwork. So what do? They agreed to suborn the constitutional process, and they agree with the president's behavior by allowing him to go forward with an unconstitutional act. That's how they do it. I want you to watch something right now that's going on. It's very interesting also. And that is how every time the outsiders make a faux pas, and some of it's not really a faux pas, just them giving their point of view, like Ben Carson. Yesterday, Ben Carson was on television, and he said that he does not think that a president of the United States, don't forget we have a Judeo-Christian background, is not what Obama's trying to say. I mean, Obama got the Muslim at the table. I mean, that's laughable.
Oh, did you hear about the Saudi Arabians being the Saudi Arabia was being appointed as like being on the committee for human rights violations in the world? This country that's beheaded more people this year than ISIS has.
That out of what side of the mouth did that come out of?
I read that. I was like, I read that, and somebody I trust, and somebody else has read it. It was a legitimate article.
They're
being appointed.
There's a lot of flipping of the conversation. The dialogue has been flipped. The switch has been flipped. There are the people. The Democrats are talking about somebody being a racist. They're talking about Donald Trump as a racist. Look at how he didn't come out there and defend the president. I guess not. If Donald Trump had said that Obama, they wanted Obama to come out when that guy was asking a question. And you go back and read the transcript. I got the transcript, so I read it, and I know exactly what the guy said. The guy asked one question. He said that we got these training camps in America, these terrorist training camps. I've been able to locate 30 of them by looking at where they are in the country. There's more than that, but I know 30 of them. We got one over there in Coldwater, and I was in Coldwater, so I know that one exists. And you got some where not necessarily a training camp as such that goes on, but I tell you what you can't do. You can't go in there, and that's in Dearbornistan, as they call it. And they do have terrorist training camps in this country, and everybody knows it. Well, the guy got up and asked a question. Now, he made some comments, some declaratory comments before he asked his question. But he only asked one question. He didn't ask about Obama's religion. He made a declaratory statement about his religion, which 43% of the Republicans, according to one poll, believe that to be true. But let me show you where the liberals are in this. George Stephanopoulos this morning, and I'll get back to Ben Carson in just a minute. But George Stephanopoulos this morning was saying to Donald Trump, why won't you say that the president is not a Muslim? Now here these people are saying that they are open to Muslims running, and Ben Carson is the one that's against it. Well, if they are so much for Muslims, what's the big deal about somebody saying that Obama is a Muslim? If you don't have a problem with Muslims, calling him a Muslim shouldn't be a problem, should it? Why is that a problem? Why would that be a problem? I think he's a Muslim. And I think he's a Muslim, and I wrote about this in my post. I think he's a Muslim because I don't see anything that he does that favors those who are not Muslims. I mean, Ahmad Muhammad is going to the White House. They have had 13, at least, that I know about, of children that were put out of school. One of them was trying to eat a cookie that would eventually end up the Pop-Tart, and a cookie in another case he was trying to chew it down where it looked like a mountain, and it came out, he ate one of the edges too much, and then it came out and it looked like it was a trigger. He got to go home. Did he get an invitation to the White House? No. And this guy, somebody go and listen to Stefan Molyneux, who did a brilliant job on this. Brilliant job, 25 minutes long. A brilliant analysis of it. Because that boy that was sent home for eating that cookie, if he had gone through a service trying to get on the plane with that cookie, he had no problem. I'll tell you who had the problem. Ahmed Muhammad going there with that digital clock, which you got in your suitcase or in this container, cigar box, whatever it was in, which is a digital clock that you got to go and plug in order to see it, because it didn't have any batteries to it. And there are people falling for this guy's story that he didn't intend any harm, if he didn't know what would happen. taken to school one day after 9/11. His dad is a Muslim activist.
Yeah,
they got all these people out here that are, you see how it goes, John?
Yeah, see, I mean, the Pop-Tart thing, I can't even see that. Okay, even if it was made to look like a gun, it's a Pop-Tart, okay? It doesn't have the ability to fire a bullet. But this guy, that thing did not look like a clock to me. Where was the numbers at?
And he didn't even build it, John. There was the engineer guy on the net and showed that was nothing other than this guy taking the barrier around what was already in place, and all he did was take the casing around. He didn't invent anything. And they fun over this guy and all of that, just showing you the proclivities of this president and how he has an affinity for Muslims, not that toward Christians. So I think he's a Muslim, and I say it unapologetically because I think all the indicators is that he's a Muslim.
Well, I interviewed with Stephanopoulos years ago. He said my Muslim faith 2 or 3 times. And
said it a couple of times. And George Stephanopoulos, by the way, John, was the one that wanted to make the correction when he made that slip. Remember he said, John McCain hasn't made an issue out of my Muslim faith, and George Stephanopoulos couldn't wait. He said, you mean your Christian faith? And then the president, to be at that point, made the correction. But, it's just a bit of different indicators. I don't need to go into it here. But why would that be? My question to the liberals, since you have no problem with a Muslim being a president, and you're upset about what Ben Carson said, then why would it be such a mockery of the president if somebody says that the president is a Muslim? Unless you have a problem with Muslims. And you're trying to come down on Ben Carson because he says he has a problem with a Muslim being a president. I have a problem with him too. We're not, but he put a caveat out there. He said, if they in fact would disavow Sharia law, I'd like to see a Muslim do that. All of those who are saying moderate Muslims, as if that exists anywhere. There are some Muslims who are not jihad, there are no Muslims who are not jihadists, but there are some Muslims that's not flying planes in the buildings. We can't say that. There are some Muslims who are not, in those training camps. We can say that also. What we cannot say is that there are Muslims who put the Constitution over and above Sharia law. Show me those Muslims. And that's what Ben Carson was talking about. And the caveat that he entered into was, if they would disavow, okay, show me the ones who would do that. And if you can't show it to us, me and Ben Carson at least, and maybe some others who feel the same way and are willing to admit it publicly, then we're against Muslims becoming president of the United States. Now, the ones that did the hollering, I'm not just talking about CARE. We expected them to come out there. They think that Ben Carson should step down. But guess who else is doing the hollering? And this is very instructive because I see him out there every time that there is a person that comes out that's in that top tier. The same names, the same ones come up. And it's the ones who have no chance of getting a nomination. I guess what they determined now is they're going to be the takedown guys. Lindsey Graham. They were just so baffled about how a person can make the comments that Donald Trump made. And really, Donald Trump didn't make any comments. It was his silence that was a problem. He didn't come out there and say that Obama was a Christian. If he had said that, Donald Trump got the evangelists, right? The evangelicals, right? If he had said that Obama was a Christian, it would have inflamed every evangelical in the country. To call this man a Christian, that's almost blasphemous. A Christian in what sense? Well, it's in the sense that he went to a Christian church. Okay, let's take that for a minute. The church was a Christian church. And it differs from the building that's called a mosque. But let's go inside the two buildings. And let's listen to what's going on inside the buildings and look at what Jeremiah Wright was saying in those profane words he used about America. And let's go over here to Iran and listen to what the mullahs are saying about America. Two different buildings, the same conversation. And Obama sat in that church with the mullahs' conversation in the Christian church for 20 years. And he wasn't wearing earmuffs. Does that sound to you like a Christian, or does it sound to you like a Muslim? And if it doesn't sound to you like a Muslim, tell me about any of his actions that have sounded like he's a Christian. Not when you consider the fact that the refugee problem right now, let's be honest about this. We have to get real in this country and tell the truth. The refugee problem in this country comes out of two presidents, George Bush and President Obama. That's the problem. That problem they created. Bush created it by 9/11, where Muslims who were inside the country bombed this country. Muslims that were here, don't tell me about some guy in a cave somewhere and you're going to go over and bomb him. That was just a cover-up to take the American people's eyes, as they're doing right now with all these other things they're doing. They're taking the American people's eyes off of what this guy raised in that question. Did you notice here, folks, that the question has not been talked about by a single reporter? The man asked a question about the terrorist camps. No one has raised that. They're talking about that Donald Trump did not defend the president. What was he supposed to say? The president is a Christian when there's no evidence? Let the president tell us that he's a Christian. The president said he's a Muslim.
Besides, would any Democrat come to the defense of the Republican candidate that they're challenging? No. Why are we supposed to be more fair and more decent and honorable to them than they ever have been?
And he also said, John, that if the Muslims are under attack, he will take the side of the Muslims. That's on record by this president. There's no record. There is no indication this president is a Christian. And we got to get real in this country and tell the truth. Let me say one last thing before we get off the air real quickly, and that is this. Ben Carson is not saying that he is for an amendment that would bar a person for the presidency if they're Muslim. He's saying he does not believe that a person that's a Muslim should be president. That is an opinion, people. It is not part of the law. And they're crucifying him for having thought. These people are part of the thought police in this country. And we got to get their hands off of the Constitution and put them where they belong, on the sideline somewhere, and take this country back. And that's what we're going to be doing, hopefully, in 2016, beginning to do that process in the next election, getting some folks out of there and put some new folks in there. Okay, we got to get out of here. Until next week, we want you to, as always, to follow your dream. Because if you don't follow your dream, you will never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.